Sorcerers need some time to become powerful in Baldur's Gate 3, as you only have very limited spell slots early on, so unfortunately you can't really become powerful early on. Whoever said that, well, they weren't a great sorcerer. Today I will show you how to become a very powerful and overpowered sorcerer early on in Baldur's Gate 3, as early as say that level 1 to level 5 bracket. And now, sorcerers aren't just fun to play in terms of the raw destructive power that they bring to the table, but you can also build them to have a great kit filled with utility that either sets up very well for the evisceration that your enemies accordingly will face, but also just gives you great control over the battlefield and remove annoying enemies from the fight like they never existed in the first place. The sorcerer has many useful tools that you can use to your advantage, and we will talk about all of that later on in this video. And today you will see how to become the ultimate sorcerer even early on that just blows up everything. But first we need to make a sorcerer. So in character creation, obviously the most important thing to do right away is to make yourself look good. You don't want to look like a bum while playing this game. But for the mechanical side of things, well, I'll tell you what I think are the best options based on my extensive experimenting so far. However, if you like role-playing as other races, or you just want to pick any spell you like the look or description of, then obviously just do that. Who am I to tell you what to pick? Baldur's Gate 3 gives you the opportunity to play the game in many different ways, and a lot of spells have a certain use. Well, except for True Strike. This thing is completely useless. For race, I would recommend the good old Devious Tiefling. That dark vision is really nice, allows you to see in dark areas up to 12 meters, and that can be very useful. Hellish Resistance also nice, fire damage can be quite annoying sometimes, and yeah, this thing helps out with that. But what is also a main selling point to these cunning creatures, I would say, is the fact that you can get an extra spell to start off with altogether. Every subrace of the Tiefling gets a different one, but I would say that the Mephistopheles Tiefling has the nicest spell to start off with, Mage Hand. With Mage Hand you essentially have like this conjured body in the form of a big ass hand that helps you out in various ways. Its best use case being, in my opinion, to use it cleverly in dangerous areas that might just kill your entire party, or otherwise inaccessible areas to do a certain action, like for example pressing a button or throwing something of importance to someone else in the distance. So Mephistopheles Tiefling for the win. Now for your cantrips and starting spells, I went with the following, and I do think this selection of different cantrips and spells in conjunction is truly the best. It has everything really that you want. First of all, Firebolt for our first cantrip. You can't really omit it. Just a nice bolt of fire that you can always use for some good old reliable damage, and it does hit quite good, and that's exactly what it is, just raw damage, but it does that job for a cantrip very well. Then we're going to go with Ray of Frost for our second cantrip. Now Ray of Frost is really nice because it deals damage like Firebolt, but it also reduces the target's movement speed with 3 meters, which is nice for kiting purposes. For example, if you see something in the distance and it's looking dangerous and you're afraid of it, well, cast a Ray of Frost and it will take damage, but it also will take longer to get to you. This cantrip comes in very clutch when you want to buy time or make sure enemies don't get to you quickly. The next cantrip on the list is going to be Shocking Grasp. I like this cantrip, it's very situational but great for the situations it's meant to be used for. Shocking Grasp makes it so your target can't use reactions, making it a very useful tool for when you find your sorcerer to be in melee range by accident or because you secretly hate your sorcerer. I'm just kidding obviously, but you don't. Most of the time you don't want to have your sorcerer in melee range compared to your enemies, as you get disadvantages to your spells and such. And well, our sorcerer isn't exactly the king of having an amazingly high HP pool and defenses, so you want to keep some distance to your enemies. So nice life story and such, and what does all of that have to do with Shocking Grasp? Well, for players new to the D&D rule set, when you move out of melee range you essentially trigger a reaction type of attack, which is called an opportunity attack. So you get punished for trying to leave your enemies. But with Shocking Grasp you prevent that, as they can't use reactions, and it also deals damage in the process of doing so. So 2 stones, 1 bird, damage, and a safe way to reposition yourself. For our final cantrip, we need to use Minor Illusion. Minor Illusion is just a really nice setup spell. Use it, enemies will go ahead and investigate what kind of amazing thing you just conjured on the spot, and while doing so they will all gather around near the illusion, aligning and setting up perfectly for a nice AoE spell and giving you the opportunity to nuke them out of existence. For our spells, Magic Missiles is a no-brainer to start off with. Guaranteed damage, it cannot miss, never ever Early on you might still not have all the accuracy you want for your spells, as we don't have ability improvements to charisma for example, so you can perhaps miss more often than later on, but Magic Missiles doesn't care about all of that. It always hits, it's just a god tier spell and you get 3 different bolts to split it, so if one enemy is on low HP, you don't have to waste all 3 missiles on that enemy, just use like 1 missile to finish that enemy off and then split the rest of your missiles accordingly and make sure you optimally spread out your damage. A very good spell, and in my opinion probably the best spell to start out with. The other one is an absolutely god tier spell, and if you know, you know, Sleep. Sleep is too good, and this spell shines particularly in the early game, so if you want to take it, you want to take it right now, as it falls off significantly after like level 4. It puts targets to sleep based on a certain HP threshold, and that HP threshold is very high for low level enemies, and pretty much means you can put half the battlefield asleep early on, which in turn means you will now have a much easier time winning these fights, as you now only need to focus on a few or even just one target. It helps out tremendously with all the control you get on the battlefield. This selection of cantrips and starting spells is in my opinion the best. I have tried out a bunch of different things, setups and selections, but these 6 together is just chef's kiss. For subclass, I would say that being a draconic sorcerer is probably overall the best. The subclass helps out in various ways. It gives you extra HP for extra sustain, higher armor class potential, it basically gives you a permanent mage armor, and it gives you another spell for free right at the start. That being said, wild magic can be very fun too if you like to spice things up and throw some RNG into the mix. That can be both beneficial or bad for you, and storm sorcery also has definitely some nice perks, so no option is truly bad right here. But for the spells in this build, Draconic will have the most synergy, especially when you pick a Draconic Ancestry that gives a bonus to your fire damage, so red, gold or brass. These Ancestries give you a nice synergy with the big boy spells like Fireball when you unlock them later on, and I like red as it gives you Burning Hands as well right at the start. With Burning Hands you'll have a really good and big selection of spells and cantrips just right at the start. And what does this extra spell in our roster actually do for us? Well, Burning Hands is an AoE spell that torches everything in a closer proximity. It can be very good, for example, with the aforementioned Minor Illusion as a setup spell. You will lack like a true AoE option early on, and with this spell you'll have an actual AoE spell that does a good job. You also have complete control over the output of this spell, because the more enemies you can get in a small space near you, the better this spell will be, so it is kind of fun to set that up. Red skills also look pretty good on your character in my opinion. It's subjective obviously, but if you do care about the cosmetics over synergies, then you can always pick any color you like for your skills. If you also want to even optimize your background, then anything that has synergy with charisma is going to be nice, but I really would just pick whatever you like. What do you fancy role playing as? For our ability points, this is then how I spread my points. I use strength and intelligence as dump abilities, as you don't need them. Strength in particular is quite irrelevant for a sorcerer. Intelligence can potentially be tied to a few checks in the game that can be nice to not have a penalty on them, but nothing too crazy that you need the points for in my opinion obviously. So I put both of these abilities at 8. Then I put the +2 bonus on charisma as it's our most important stat, and the +1 bonus in dexterity as it's our second most important stat, resulting into charisma at 17 and dexterity at 60. Then for constitution I put it at 14 as it's also an important ability for us. Constitution checks are very important for a sorcerer as it helps us maintain concentration for example, and it also just gives us more HP, which is great for survivability. Finally, I've kept the game's recommendation of putting 10 points in wisdom, as there are quite some relevant wisdom checks in the game, so I didn't remove the points from it. That being said, if you want to summarize this section, I would prioritize our stats in the following order, with charisma being the most important stat, followed up by dexterity, then constitution, then wisdom, then intelligence, and finally strength. And with all of that information, you can now finally make your sorcerer and have it have a very good foundation to start off your adventure with. Now, when you enter the Nautiloid, I would strongly recommend to clear this entire place, kill everything, and if you're for an adventure definitely trying to get the commander kill, you'll want to make sure to keep the mind flayer alive as long as possible for that purpose. Killing the commander and a lot of the monsters on the ship will grant you level 2 right when you leave the ship. The commander also drops a very good sword that is irrelevant for a sorcerer, so you want to give it to your melee fighter, tank companion. For example, you can give it to Lae'zel, which you unlock like at the start, and she will do great things with it. With the XP from the ship, you will now be level 2 or very close to it, depending on if you went for that commander kill. At level 2, however, things get interesting because you unlock meta magic, which is really nice. I would get the twin and distant meta magic. Distant will give us more range when necessary to kill off targets that are very far away. Can be very useful sometimes. The other meta magic is truly insane as it allows you to hit 2 targets at the same time with spells that would otherwise only target 1 enemy at a time, which brings me also to the next spell that you want to take at level 2, Ice Knife. This spell wasn't in early access, but it's very good, especially at these lower levels. Reason being is that it's a single target spell that deals decent damage, but then additionally it has an AoE component that also deals damage. Combining these two different elements of damage leads to very good damage for the spell in its entirety. But it gets better, considering it's in its essence a single target spell, so you do have to target something with it to shoot it off, but it comes with that secondary effect being that ice cold explosion. But the first part of what I just said means that you can actually twin the spell using the twinned meta magic spell, and that's obviously really good considering you can't normally twin the more traditional AoE spells. So use the twinned meta magic option, target 2 different enemies with Ice Knife, and you'll hit both of those and accordingly also hit surrounding enemies thanks to the explosion. So it is 2 things in one, AoE and great single target damage. This leads to very good damage output as a sorcerer early on, and you can just quickly get rid of multiple enemies or deal great damage to them, and then additionally freeze them as well in the process of doing so. Even if you miss the initial shard that you throw out, it will still explode and still give you that surface of ice. With it and combining it with the rest of our spells that we already talked about, you'll breeze from level 2 to level 3 as well really fast. At level 3, you definitely want to pick up the quickened meta magic as your next meta magic. This meta magic allows you to use 2 actions in 1 turn, which can be huge. It can be the difference between a win and a lost battle, but it also just means you can quickly kill everything fast if you want. Imagine chaining 2 fireballs back to back without having to end your turn, or using a fireball and then chaining that into like magic missiles to finish off whatever survived. It's a really good meta magic. For a spell, I would take Scorching Ray now. This is a very bursty spell that finishes off your roster of damage, and it operates like magic missiles in the sense that you can split the damage between different targets. But if you use it all on one target, you can do some absolute ridiculous damage at this stage of the game, but also later on when you can up level it and deal even more damage with it. It's a really good bursty spell. And what is also really good is you hitting that like button and subscribing to me, hitting the bell, as you have made it to this point in this video, so you know you want to do that. Now, Misty Step is also a great level 2 spell that you can get at level 3 for a sorcerer, but we will get it from a gear piece, so you don't actually have to take it here. More on that later on when we get to gear. For level 4, I would get a CC spell, as we have already so much damage in our kit. A spell like Web, for instance, is quite nice, and I would swap out Sleep for Chromatic Orb at this point. Sleep has now kind of lost its value, as enemies will now start getting higher HP values than the specified HP thresholds of this spell, even if you up level it, so it's getting harder to really make good use out of it. With Chromatic Orb, however, we now have another great spell that we can twin, and it packs a punch. It is a great spell, especially because we can choose which type of damage we want it to be, which becomes more relevant as you progress in the game, and it also accordingly means that we can use a type of damage that we know will have a benefit against a certain type of enemy. For example, use Examine on an enemy and see if your enemy has vulnerability against a certain type of damage, and then you choose that for your Chromatic Orb, which in turn will mean it will deal twice the damage, and like I said, you can twin it. Some of the Chromatic Orb effects also grant you some CC, or otherwise have like this damage over time type of effect, in addition to the initial bolt, which makes it a very good pickup from both a raw damage perspective as well as a utility perspective at this point in time. For your feats at level 4, we're going to go with ability improvement and get 2 points in charisma, putting you at 90 charisma, and right away with that we're also going to get 20 charisma right now, which is the max level that you can get for this ability like this if you don't consider items. For that purpose, it is a good time to start the Auntie Ethel quest. I won't give any spoilers to what this quest exactly entails, but you find her right here south of the Blighted Village. Do her quest, make sure you save the girl, and essentially make a deal with Auntie, which in return will give you her hair. You might think, why do I want the hair of this weirdo? Well, her hair is very useful because it's an actual item and gives you a permanent boost to any of your abilities, so use it on charisma, and now you'll have 20 levels in our most important ability quite early on. In terms of the quest that you want to do at this point in time, definitely also do Volo's quest No spoilers again right here, but you want to rescue him and let him do surgery on you. This will in return give you a really nice item, which essentially gives you through sight, so you can detect invisible enemies up to 9 meters, which means nothing can ever sneak up to you and have advantages against you in their attack rolls. At level 5, we get the opportunity to get something really great and iconic: Fireball. Everybody has been scared of this infamous spell for the past decades in any D&D setup because it's that deadly and it translates very well onto Baldur's Gate 3. It is time to start blowing things up. Fireball is everything we've ever dreamed about as a sorcerer, and it doesn't require an introduction, and we finally have it at level 5. It is AoE, it is big damage, it's explosive, and it blows up everything and does insane damage. If you pick Dragon Ancestry, it also scales with the buff you get from that from level 6 and onwards. With Fireball, we essentially have a better Ice Knife at this point in terms of damage and utility as well, so you can swap out Ice Knife and instead get another CC spell like Hold Person, for example. Hold Person is extremely good versus humanoid targets. It basically just removes them from the fight while keeping their body right there, and your melee fighters will crit them every time they hit them. At level 6, you want to take Counter Spell. This is a great defensive reaction spell that can prevent any incoming spell that is cast on you. So your opponent uses their massive blasty spell, for example, that they have been trying to use for ages. No thanks, that is a thing of the past. Use Counter Spell and it completely negates their spell, and this spell in comparison to the rest of our kit has a unique new effect that complements the rest very well. Now for gear, there are some good pickups early on. The most important one is going to be the Physics Spark Amulet. This is an absolute monster early game amulet in my opinion. It gives our magic missiles another missile every time you shoot it off, and it also works if you up level your magic missiles. So instead of 3 missiles at level 1, you now have 4 missiles at level 1 magic missiles cast. Instead of 4 missiles at level 2 magic missiles cast, you now have 5 missiles, and so on and so on. And keep in mind, when you up level your magic missiles, the damage also increases, so it's basically a win-win situation. You get the Physics Spark Amulet right here in the Underdark. You want to buy it from the trader. Other gear that you want is a gear piece with the Misty spell on it, like I already hinted at. Like I said, I didn't take it as a leveling perk because you can get it quite easily through gear, and this spell is really good, so you definitely want to have it. These two items are good examples of items that have Misty Step on them, and I would use the amulet first, as you can get it in the Defiled Temple early on, and then later on when you get to the Underdark, you get the Physics Spark Amulet from the trader, so you can swap it out, and instead you want to get the Disintegrating Nightwalker's boots that also have Misty Step on them. Now for those that don't know what Misty Step does, it gives you the possibility to teleport as a bonus action in combat, giving you a really nice way to reposition yourself, for example to teleport away from danger, or to reposition yourself in such a way that you have a very nice position to hit your enemies with. It is also great outside of combat, as you can use it to quickly get to places that are otherwise annoying to reach, to get some of that juicy loot or to complete certain quests. But these boots also give you the Nightwalker passive, which is insane as it accordingly nullifies a variety of movement impairing effects on our sorcerer. And I'm not going to specify how to exactly get these boots as it's a bit spoilery, so you'll have to just search that up if you're interested. But I will say you also can get them in the Underdark at the Grimforge, and it's related to True Soul Near. Yes, that guy. Not going to say more than that, just keep this information in mind if you want these boots as well. Now regarding staffs or staves, whatever you want to call it, there are not a lot of options early on. You do however have a nice staff that synergizes with my selection of spells early on. It is the one that Aaron sells at the Druid Grove. The staff comes with the Create Water spell for free, and this spell synergizes quite well with both our Ice Knife, but also more importantly our Ray of Frost, which we can use at any time since it's a cantrip. Either way, you can make the target wet, and with that double your ice damage accordingly when you use your ice spells. But at the same time, you transform the puddle of water that the Create Water spell creates into an ice surface when you cast either Ice Knife or Ray of Frost. The ice surface will benefit you as it will have the movement speed of your targets, and they can become prone as well. And what that essentially means is that they will fall over, which means they can't take actions or move. The spell Sparkler Staff is probably otherwise the best early game staff that you can get. It builds up stacks of lightning charges, and when you have 5 of them on your character, your next spell will hit your target with an additional attack roll of 1d8 with lightning damage, so that can definitely be a nice bonus early on to your damage output. You get the staff from completing the Rescue the Grand Duke quest near Waukeen's Rest. As you see, there's not like a huge amount of different gear options that you need absolutely early on, but that kind of changes, and I'm not going to say too much yet as you progress and get to level 7 and higher. And on that note, I will end this video because that is going to be part of the follow-up video. Yes, I will be making a level 7 to level 12 sorcerer guide as well, where we explore a lot of the extremely destructive mid to late game options as well, and the sorcerer really becomes insanely powerful late game. So yes, we're ending on a cliffhanger. Stay tuned for that. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss that. Hit the bell, like the video, leave a comment, and yeah, just do all of that stuff. It helps out.